All right, week 14, the future. And there's a lot of readings, but there's a lot of possible futures. People are trying to guess at what the future holds for not just the United States, but for the entire world. And there's about three different explanations. The first one is civilizational, the second one is economic, and the third one is individualistic. So, Huntington is about civilizations, Fukuyama and Hart and Negri, they're about the economy, and the final one, Agamben, that's about the individual and the individual's connection to the collective. So we're going to talk about it one by one. So the first one is Huntington's Dead Souls article. So the Huntington Dead Souls are basically the elites, and the elites that don't have any connection to any form of nationalism or civic identity. So the dead soul is for Huntington the elites, and the general public. These are the people who still have this affinity for patriotism, for identity with what was good in the past. So some idea of what Americanism is, to be a patriot, whereas elites are trying to move us, or according to Huntington, move us away from that understanding and incorporating a more of a global identity. So elites have a more of a deeper transnational interest with a commitment to the international system, global business. They have interests in that they make money that way. Transnational ideas sort of reducing the power of the nation state and increasing the power of international institutions like the United Nations, whereas the wider public, the general public, they still hold on to this idea of being American or being part of a nation, and that the patriotic public is what is being ignored by the government, according to Huntington. So he's trying to say that we have a democracy in this country, but it's not representing the wider public, right? And so he wrote this article in the early 90s, and he understood that there is a separation between the elites and the wider people. And this could explain this divergence in both the American Democratic Party and the Republican Party, because on one hand, with the Democrats, you have the elites of the Democratic Party, and then you have the Bernie Sanders people. You also have in the Republican Party those that support Trump, and then those that support the elite. So populism, this idea of populism, it's still very relevant, and that's being brought out by in the Huntington article, and he did so very, very well. Huntington, a lot of people consider him like a dinosaur. I mean, he passed away; he's now gone, but he's trying to understand like what's the future of the world. So that's one part of it. But that article kind of got him thinking about, well, what about other countries and what about their understanding of global politics? So his work, he wrote a great book that many people discarded as racist, but I think there's something there. It's called The Clash of Civilizations and the Remaking of World Order. And he argues that culture and cultural identities, which at the broadest level are civilizational identities, are shaping the patterns of cohesion, disintegration, and conflict in the post-Cold War world. So he sees a sort of West versus the rest coming up. So, the Western world as a monolith against like the forces of China and probably orthodoxy in Russia, and also of the Islamic world, which is clearly not monolith at all, but he groups that up, and that's one of my critiques of Huntington, is that some of these lines, these civilizational lines, are very diverse and very divergent. But he's saying that there's some core civilizations that are going to seek to hold on to their culture. And we can't just simply expect that globalization, this idea that the world is going to move closer together and Americanism and American consumer culture will somehow take over. He doesn't buy that. He's not for that. So he's arguing that civilizations and cultures are still important, and that many cultures are going to reject and even come together to push back on American influence. And he's arguing that Islam and China are basically these two elements that's gonna probably counteract the United States. And so he's saying that it's not about states and their interests, it's about cultures and their interests, civilizations and their interests. So his ideas are very different from the person I'm going to talk about next, which is Francis Fukuyama. And Francis Fukuyama, he had this idea of end of history. So end of history is this idea that democracy and capitalism are the final form of human government. There's nothing after this, and there's no challenge to it. The only challenge to liberal democracy and capitalism was communism, and Soviet Union is gone. And so the only alternative, there's no other alternative than democracy and capitalism. He identifies other kinds of groups like Islamic fundamentalism, fascism, communism as all threats, but then he says those threats will disappear because inevitably people are going to have to assimilate to the new world order. So Huntington would disagree with that, of course, but for Fukuyama, he sees the New World Order as fundamentally natural. It's grounded in this liberal theory of democracy and capitalism, and that's the future. And of course, it's not going to be a very dynamic or a future that is based on struggle. It's going to be one that is based on cooperation, and any group or anyone that tries to challenge that order, they're going to be eliminated, because democracy and capitalism associated with that is the power of the United States, and the United States is going to eradicate any threat to the end of history. So the end of history doesn't mean that the world is coming to an end. It just means that there's no more conflict between the forces of capitalism and democracy and socialism. Socialism is gone. The Soviet Union is gone, and it's not coming back, according to Fukuyama. So his idea that democracy is going to spread around the world is inevitable, and there is nothing else to worry about, because this is the end of history. The dialectic of the challenge between two competing forces is over, and that's that, according to Fukuyama. And of course, that is opposed to Huntington, because Huntington says it's not about that. It's about cultures and civilizations and those differences that drive the human experience. Now we're going to get to Hardt and Negri. And Hardt and Negri are Marxists. So they are going to come from a different avenue. It's a critique. And so he says that Fukuyama is not correct. It's not about states anymore. It's not, and also Huntington is correct. It's not about cultures anymore, but that there is going to be this force, like the hidden hand of the market, and that market is going to generate political outcomes, but it's not going to be led by a country or a state. It's just going to be this force, this hidden hand, a force of control that is for example, Fukuyama says that the ideological struggle is over and nothing can challenge it. That's primarily what Hardt and Negri are talking about. They're talking about the future of the world as an empire that is fundamentally not centralized like Rome was centralized in Rome. It's decentralized. It's all over the world. it's in our heads. It's the way that we think. It's the way that we feel. It's the way that we perceive our world. So it's not simply that there's power and sovereignty within a unit called a state, but it's more like a consent. Like we understand that this is the future, that the future is capitalism, and capitalism is all there is to it. If anybody opposes that, then they're going to be ostracized, not by the state, but by the market. And so the market has this disciplinary approach. So if you object to anything that the decentralized empire says, then you're going to be punished for it. And so for Hardt and Negri, it's not simply that capitalism is centered in a country or a state, but capitalism is all pervasive. It is everywhere. It is in our minds. It's in our values. And those values will determine our end. And we need to keep up. We need to always keep up with that, or else we're going to be left in the dust and we'll be punished for it. And so for Fukuyama, it's not about this Americanism. It's about the idea of the market now has control. So empire is simply this new way of power that is hidden. It's not clear where it comes from. It's basically the a network of elites that transcend culture, that transcend states and nations. And it's all about exporting a specific style of being, of consumerism. And that's how it is. It is a normative force, more normative in the sense of it controls us. It tells us how we should live our lives. So that's the most important thing that you need to take away from the lecture. And of course, I forgot to mention the study guide concepts, but I will do so now. Huntington's dead souls, we already defined that as the elites of the system that do not see themselves as part of a nation. Hardt and Negri's empire, this destructive force that is fundamentally not centered in a country or a state, but it is an idea, these ideas that formulate good and bad. We're going to look at what's called biopolitics in Agamben, his idea of the state of exception, and his thoughts on the COVID-19 outbreak. So all of these are very, very important for you to understand for the midterm, and these are very interesting ideas about the future of the world. But let's turn to Agamben. Let's see what he has to say about our future. Now, Giorgio Agamben is this famous Italian scholar, right? And he talked about the state of exception. And so the state of exception comes from the ideas of Carl Schmitt. And Carl Schmitt wrote during the time of Nazi Germany. And he saw that the Nazis, if the way they wanted to take over the entire state of Germany was to enact or cancel or destroy democracy and rule of law in any way. The Constitution, you put aside normal politics and you embark on emergency measures. All right, and the emergency measures, according to the Nazis, was to preserve people, to save people, right? So Giorgio Agamben takes this idea and he just goes crazy with it from the early 2000s, late 2000s, and early 2010s. Lots of literature was on Agamben's work on the state of exception, and I really liked his work, and I still enjoy his work. His work is fantastic. He talks about this idea of biopolitics, and biopolitics is the way in which the government seeks to protect you and your life, right? And so the government is going to protect your life, but do so in a way that might subvert all other aspects of living. So your friendships, your religious convictions, your ability to speak freely, any normal conditions of life, right? So after 9/11, we had the terrorist attacks of 9/11. The United States initiated the Patriot Act, and the Patriot Act was this violation of the American Constitution, the right of citizens to not suffer through illegal searches and seizures. That's what we talk about that check it out, my fascist article as well, and I go into that a little bit more. And so the whole deal was we're going to preserve and prevent terrorism, but we're going to have to make sure that we collect information about people and citizens living in the United States. And so from that we determined that the United States decided that in order to prevent terrorism, that it was going to basically sacrifice some elements of what makes the United States the United States. So expanding surveillance abilities of law enforcement to make sure that people, the information that people were getting, like wiretapping, was basically to ensure that nobody was planning another terrorist attack. And many people saw this as fundamentally good because it was labeled the Patriot Act. So how could you be against something that is called the Patriot Act, right? You must be unpatriotic, right? So the article on Agamben, he argues that fear is a poor advisor. So if you're afraid, you tend to do things that are irrational, right? And what he's trying to say, and this is very controversial stuff, like what he did during the coronavirus. Basically, he was saying that the way that countries are reacting to COVID is definitely dangerous because you are sacrificing your ability to interact with people, your religious affiliations, your political affiliations. You are destroying your capacity to trust people because you don't know if they're carrying the virus. You have to wear a mask, which hinders the ability to see the emotions of the face. And so he really he went off on it. So, and people were saying that, well, he's not taking the virus seriously, but he never, ever, ever said that he was a biologist, but he was, and that he understood the disease, but he was trying to give us a better understanding of the unintended consequences of the lockdown, right? So the government need to preserve the individual. Your biopolitics undercut other issues. So the government seeks to protect our bare life, but we sacrifice certain things in those emergency measures, our ability to move around, for example, quarantine, and so forth. And so read those articles. It's very interesting how power works, how the state works, and what the future is. I don't know what the future is, but these are some of the main scholars that I found very intriguing. And these philosophers are fantastic. They have a wonderful line of work, and I'm so happy to introduce you to them for the entire course. I really hope you enjoyed this entire course. I know it was a lot of reading, but I think it's good for your soul, it's good for your critical thinking, and it's good to interact with different social and political ideas so that you can make a decision for yourself what is the best for you and what you think is the best for the entire world from your perspective, right? So I think I hope you enjoyed the course. I hope that you continue thinking about different things about the world in a critical way. And all the best, and thank you very much for your attention, and I really hope you liked these lectures. And I kept them short because I want to stick to the point and make sure that you succeed in understanding the main ideas. Thank you very much.